As a new school year dawns, an introverted high school senior named Neil daydreams about his crush Summer. As his vivid daydream goes on, Neil uses his drawing skills to mindlessly doodle remarkable comic book figures, depicting the premise of his fantasy in which Summer gets abducted out of the school bus one morning by a mysterious masked criminal who shoots his way inside the bus by killing the bus driver. Neil quickly steps up to take control of the bus and calm the terrified kids, which impresses everyone. Then Neil's best friend, Gilbert, takes over driving the bus. Neil chases the abductor's car, jumps in, and rescues Summer, who is terrified out of her mind. As everyone cheers in admiration of Neil, Summer thanks her knight in shining armor, professes her love to him, and asks him out. In reality, on the first day of school, Neil and his sister Jacqueline run around the house trying to get ready in time and share a quick breakfast with their loving parents before running out of the house.
Got 5 seconds.
Even though he's a senior and despite people making fun of him, Neil still uses the school bus to transport him to and from school, runs to catch it, and arrives at school on time. Inside the bus, Neil shares his seat with middle schoolers and endures an awkward exchange, which makes him wish for the school year to end as fast as it had begun. Despite his best efforts, Neil arrives at school late and joins Gilbert at his seat. During the lecture, Gilbert and Neil discuss their unfortunate social status at school and share how much they hate showing up to a place where they feel like nobodies every day. Gilbert then relates to his best friend the story of a kid in Cambodia who wisely made a wish at the magical hour of 11:11 p.m. one night, asking for clean drinking water for his village, which came true and changed the lives of his people for the better. However, Gilbert warns Neil that the universe must agree with the proposed wish for it to come true, and that it only lasts for 24 hours before it resets the next night at the same hour.
Everything resets the very next night at 11:11.
At lunchtime, Jocelyn and her friend Madison join Neil and Gilbert at their table, and the foursome discusses Summer's upcoming birthday party. Jocelyn shares that she has just gotten an invite for the coveted social event and shows her brother a cute invite card, which only makes him jealous. Jocelyn then encourages Neil to ask Summer for an invite, just like she did, reasoning that he will never know how Summer feels about him unless he gets to know her and puts himself out there. As Neil hesitates, Gilbert follows the advice and asks Madison out, but gets turned down flatly. Gilbert moves on from this encounter quickly and, together with Jocelyn, encourages Neil to take his chance. Neil hesitatingly agrees and is escorted to Summer's lunch table by Gilbert, who goes the extra mile by starting the conversation and setting Neil up to ask the question. In an unexpected turn of events, Neil freezes and just stares at the confused Summer before uncontrollably vomiting everywhere, including on his beautiful crush, leaving everyone stunned. Mortified, Neil returns home that afternoon, shuts himself in his room, and works on his character in the comic book. A few hours later, Gilbert comes to Neil's house hoping to keep his freaked-out friend company. The best friends spend the next few hours playing dancing games and discussing how to possibly recover from the social humiliation of the day. In the evening, the duo climb up to the roof of the house, smoke weed, and just enjoy each other's company and share what's on their mind. Then the boys see Neil's cool neighbor Jimmy returning from work in a shiny new car and with a girl on his arm, and wonder what his secret is for living their dream life. Before going back to his house, Gilbert comforts his embarrassed friend, tells him that he will always be there for him, and makes him feel better. That night at 11:10 p.m., as Neil finishes up drawing another comic book set, Gilbert texts and reminds him to make the magical wish promptly. The next morning, on account of the late night, Neil wakes up late, throws on his hoodie, and runs out of his house to make it to his bus just in time. At school, Neil rushes to find Gilbert and confides that he still feels humiliated by what transpired the day before and declares that he wants to leave the school. To his surprise, Gilbert receives him coldly and walks away before he even finishes talking. Neil wonders what's going on with his best friend, but pushes this aside to proceed to class. On his way, he passes by a mirror and is utterly flabbergasted to see a handsome stranger staring back at him. Neil can't believe his eyes and checks himself out multiple times in different mirrors, but each time a more handsome, more fit guy appears on the other side. Neil then spends his day interacting with many of his peers as they happily greet him wherever he goes. He waits until the end of the school day to approach Gilbert once again and argues that he really is Neil.
I'm Neil.
Highly skeptical, Gilbert Gilbert asks the new face things only Neil would know and is surprised when the stranger answers each one correctly, and some even with an explanation. Then, as Gilbert and Neil walk home discussing the consequence of the miracle, Jacqueline approaches Gilbert and asks him if he has seen her brother while Neil stands right next to her. Neil and Gilbert slowly explain what happened to Jacqueline, who is dumbfounded by the ambitious tale. To prove matters once and for all, Gilbert proposes the stranger should show them his drawing skills so that they can compare with Neil's comic book and decide if it's really him. The trio then heads to Neil and Jacqueline's house, where Gilbert happily volunteers to pose for Neil, hoping to prove his identity once and for all. Neil zones in and does what he does best. Once finished, Jacqueline and Gilbert are impressed by the effort and, despite Neil's resistance, proceed to access his tablet.
It's my iPad.
So that they can compare the drawings. As the duo goes through the comic sets, they make fun of Neil's obsession with Summer until they get to the drawing of his own comic book character, which eerily looks exactly like the young man sitting in front of them, which convinces them that the stranger is really Neil and that his wish had turned him into his fantasy. Once convinced, the group decides to give Neil a new name and agree on Ace. Jacqueline then promises to cover for Ace with their parents, while Gilbert wastes no time in posting Ace on his Instagram, describing him as a new model actor friend in town for a few days. Since the wish is known to only stay for a day, Gilbert immediately decides to take Ace shopping for cool clothes that go with his good looks and cool vibes. As the duo sets out from the house, Ace gets a lot of compliments and attention on his appearance, including from the Uber driver. The boys then get to the clothing store, and as they start to browse, they are approached by one of the store's attendants, who compliments Ace on his look.
Did you just start modeling or something?
And after chatting a bit, invites him to a famous woman named Victoria's wild party to be held later that night. The man gives the boys the password for the party's entry, promises to send Ace the invite on Instagram, and warns the duo to make sure to access it so that they won't have to pay the $1,000 each required for uninvited guests. Then the boys finish their shopping and, until the time of the party, go to the local record store to watch one of their schoolmates named Anna, whom Gilbert is interested in, perform a song. There, the boys divide and conquer as Gilbert goes to chit-chat with Anna, while Ace approaches Summer with a better confidence and introduces himself. After a few minutes of small talk, Ace successfully asks Summer for an invite to her birthday party and finally gets one, while Gilbert strikes out with Anna on the other side of the record store. However, Ace is gutted to see Summer with one of the cool kids named Chad. Later, Gilbert and Ace leave the store and take time out to celebrate Ace's success.
We got the invitation.
Then, as the boys head back to their neighborhood, they run into the same Uber driver, who makes Ace a bit uncomfortable by making inappropriate complimentary comments. Now that Ace has finally managed to secure Summer's birthday invite, the boys use the downtime in the Uber to turn their attention to the next task, which is preparing for the biggest party of the year at Victoria's residence. After some discussion, Gilbert suggests reaching out to Neil's cool neighbor Jimmy and asking him to lend them one of his cool cars so that they can arrive at the party in style and protect their pride. Hence, Ace and Gilbert head to Jimmy's house and catch up with him just as he prepares to leave for work. Once the boys learn that Jimmy's a Porsche salesman, they politely ask to borrow his car. Jimmy considers this request for a moment and comes up with an offer of his own.
Money's sweet like honey, so let's talk some rides.
He states that a lot of paperwork must be completed if the boys decide to process their needs through the dealership, and proposes to give them a deal off the books, which piques the boys' interest. Before naming his price, Jimmy offers to take the intrigued boys for a test drive and gets in the driver's seat, while Gilbert and Ace share the only other seat. Jimmy demonstrates the expensive car's horsepower and excites the young men as he powers through the neighborhood at an incredible speed. Then Jimmy goes a step further to impress them, and as he demonstrates the car's versatility, Ace gets thrown out of the small car and lands painfully in one of the neighbor's neighbors' lawns. Gilbert helps his friend up, and after making sure he's okay, the boys follow Jimmy into his house to hear his price for the Porsche and hope to make a deal. Once inside, Gilbert is shocked to realize that Jimmy had picked his pocket and stolen his wallet. Jimmy then asks how much money the boys have, collects the mere $70 they have on them, and asks them if they have a car they can present as collateral.
Oh no, that would be a negative.
Once he learns that the boys have nothing to their name, Jimmy proceeds to throw them out until he hears about Victoria's party, which gets him to suddenly sympathize with the duo. Jimmy then proposes a new deal in which he invites himself to the invite-only party and orders the boys to get him juice and wait for him at the local food mart, where he schedules to pick them up to take them to the party. Once finished with that, as Ace struggles with his earlier injuries, he joins Gilbert to go to a local weed dealer named Jay, whom Gilbert only knows from the online gaming world, to buy some experience-enhancing drugs to ensure they will have the best time at Victoria's party. However, once there, things get incredibly weird and uncomfortable as Jay gives Ace creepy compliments and demands inappropriate favors in exchange for the free drugs. Fortunately, after a harrowing few minutes, the boys make it out of Jay's house safely and with their merchandise. As their appointment time with Jay nears, the boys head to the local food mart as discussed, get Jimmy a juice, and wait for him, trying to assuage the doubt of his arrival out of their minds.
I just don't know about this guy. What if he doesn't show?
A few minutes later, to the relief of the boys, Jimmy shows up in the Porsche, and as the duo pays for the juice, Jimmy stuns them by storming into the store, mask pointing a gun, and asking the clerk to empty the cash registers at gunpoint. Before the boys can process any of what's happening, Jimmy gives each one of them a duffel bag and orders them to fill it up with the money from the cash registers. Upon Jimmy's orders, Gilbert runs out of the store with the first bag while Ace continues to fill up. Then, unexpectedly, the clerk uses a lapse in Jimmy's judgment to grab his gun and start shooting. Jimmy rushes out the door just in time, but Ace unfortunately gets left behind as he gets accidentally knocked out. Outside, Jimmy gets into the Porsche and orders Gilbert to drive and is annoyed to see the young man's defiance as doesn't want to leave his best friend behind.
I can't leave Neil, man.
Gilbert ignores all the chaos and circles around the store in an attempt to wait for Ace, who successfully makes it out okay as the clerk chases him, shooting at him. Jimmy pops the trunk of the Porsche and screams for Ace to jump in as soon as possible so that they can finally make their escape. This goes without a hitch, and the trio manages to successfully flee the area by the skin of their teeth as the police respond to the clerk's emergency call. However, this backfires on the clerk as the police have a hard time believing his story and fathom that someone in a Porsche is out robbing stores and proceeding to apprehend him. The trio of bandits manage to escape capture and make sure to drive for a few hours before taking a break. Once they have had time to reflect on what happened at the food mart, they want to know why Jimmy would involve them in a criminal activity that endangers all their safety. However, Jimmy is not fazed by any of his new partner's questions and concerns, dismisses their fear, and tries to inspire them to leave that experience behind and go forward.
Food marts get robbed all the damn time.
Unfortunately, the opposite happens between Ace and Gilbert as the shock and gravity of their situation gets to Ace and causes him to disregard all that Gilbert has done for him and blindly blame his best friend for everything that went wrong in the last 2 days. Being the good friend that he is, Gilbert tries to calm down Ace and explain that they were on the same team, that he didn't know about the robbery plan, and asserts that everything he does is in the best interest of Ace at heart. This all goes through one ear and out the other for the frustrated Ace, who storms off. Gilbert is left to enjoy the adventures of the night with Jimmy, who tries to play it cool and composed, but is worried deep down about the potential consequence of their night, as everything has been captured on video. Jimmy pushes this thought to the side, smokes some weed with Gilbert, who is still upset about losing his friend,
Yeah, that's my best friend.
and heads to Victoria's party. Meanwhile, Ace calls Uber in hopes of making it to Summer's party and calls Jacqueline to ask her how the party is going and whether Chad is there. Jacqueline updates him about the party in detail and advises him to get Summer a gift to compete with Chad's cool efforts. As his driver stops to get some gas, Neil rushes to the gas station store to get something for Summer. Inside, he looks around a bit, checks out Summer's Instagram to figure out her favorite chocolate, and picks it out. However, before he can proceed to pay, a cop walks in and starts chatting with the clerk about the robbery from earlier in the night, which grabs Ace's attention. Ace continues to eavesdrop and becomes extremely concerned when he learns that the cops have video footage of Gilbert and him at the time of the robbery, making them an equal suspect with Jimmy. As Ace tries to decide how to proceed, he is shocked to see a man in the opposite aisle of the store put on his mask, load his gun, and prepare to rob the store. Without hesitation and hoping the man could learn from his mistake, Ace advises the man to change his mind by informing him of the cop's presence at the counter.
No, don't do it.
However, the rookie criminal ignores Ace's warning and tries to go along with his reckless plan. But before he can do anything, the clerk notices his suspicious manners. As soon as the robber pulls out his gun, Ace uses the ensuing chaos to run out of the store successfully, only to realize that he has lost Summer's invitation in the process. Ace irresponsibly returns to the store to grab the invitation and interrupts the criminal's attempt to escape. The criminal holds Ace as his hostage at gunpoint and demands the police should let him escape in return for the safe release of Ace. A few minutes into the standoff, the police recognize Ace from the video footage of the earlier robbery at the food mart, which leaves the young man no choice but to hit and overpower the rookie criminal holding him at gunpoint, running towards his Uber and fleeing the area. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Gilbert and Jimmy make it to Victoria's party and are welcomed by the staff after identifying themselves and providing the secret password. Before they can proceed to the party, Gilbert and Jimmy are informed that the event is a costume party
Outfits?
and are given costumes so that they can blend in with the rest of the crowd. Elsewhere, once he escapes the near capture successfully, Ace draws different fantastical scenarios with Summer in his comic book as he heads to his crush's birthday party. There, he searches for Jacqueline, and as he approaches her, Jacqueline brushes him off seriously, forgetting his new looks. Once it all comes back to her, Jacqueline apologizes profusely, proceeds to give him tips, and encourages him to approach Summer. Elsewhere, at Victoria's party, Gilbert runs into Jay, who tries to connect with him and use him as a wingman. Jimmy uses this opportunity to scout the venue and discreetly heads into the back rooms after snatching a key card. There, Jimmy tries to rob Victoria's men at gunpoint, only to be overpowered by the professional guards and subdued. At Summer's party, when Ace hesitates to comply, Jacqueline acts on his behalf.
Just go dance with her. She's right fucking there.
Introduces herself to Summer's friends and starts up a conversation with them so that Ace can use the opportunity to speak to Summer privately. Ace thanks his sister and goes up to Summer to reintroduce himself, hoping to get to know her. He talks to her for a few minutes and then presents her with the invitation he risked his life for, only to learn that it's not needed at all. A few minutes later, as Chad delightfully observes from afar, Summer excuses herself and leaves Ace's company to check on her guests. At Victoria's party, Gilbert, Jimmy, and Jay are all summoned to Victoria's office, where she demands to know what's going on. Trying to convince Victoria it was all just a misunderstanding, Jimmy and Gilbert profusely apologize for what happened and beg her for mercy. Victoria decides to forgive them and spare their life. Then, as reparations for all the damages caused by Jimmy's shenanigan, Victoria demands to take his Porsche, despite his claims that it belongs to the car dealership. Back at Summer's party, to the confusion of Ace, Chad approaches him with his friend, tries to ascertain his interest in Summer, and proceeds to call a truce, in which the best man may win Summer's affection, without any animosity from the other.
No hard feelings?
At Victoria's party, once the Porsche is seized, Jimmy and Gilbert are thrown out of the famous party with nothing but their undergarments. The duo discusses and try to figure out how to even attempt to get the Porsche back, but come up empty. After much consideration, Jimmy proposes they should break into Victoria's parking lot to steal the Porsche. To that effect, Jimmy and Gilbert crawl through the dirty, snake-infested sewage tunnels and manage to infiltrate Victoria's parking lot, where the Porsche sits proudly. However, before the duo get to the Porsche, Victoria comes out of nowhere and warns Jimmy to leave her and her property alone. Then, Victoria continues with her threats, bragging about the many professional guards on her payroll. Feeling desperate, Gilbert comes up to the furious woman from behind, hits her with a shovel, and knocks her out. With Victoria knocked out, Gilbert and Jimmy successfully steal the Porsche and flee the area. During their drive, Jimmy calms down the panicked Gilbert and tries to assure him that he did what he had to do for their safety. Once the young man settles down, the duo shares some details about their life and get to know each other better. Jimmy reveals that he gets depressed sometimes as his life didn't turn out the way he had hoped, and adds that even though he's 30 years old, he still lives in his father's basement, and he feels like a failure because of it.
I've accomplished nothing.
Turned off by the chaotic events that took place that day, Jimmy opts to call it a night and heads to his home along with Gilbert. There, Jimmy introduces Gilbert to his elderly dad, who, as soon as the duo arrives, presents Jimmy with a cake and wishes him a happy birthday. Gilbert feels bad for Jimmy and how he spent his birthday and decides to stay a bit longer at the house and shares a piece of cake with the birthday man and his father. After the celebration is concluded, encouraged by Jimmy's father, Gilbert opts to take Jimmy to Summer's party and convinces the birthday man to join him. At Summer's party, hoping to bait Ace and show off, Chad goes around the house asking the attendees to set up a dance-off competition, which really stresses Ace. Meanwhile, Gilbert and Jimmy arrive at the party, and as Jimmy hangs around, Gilbert goes to find his best friend. After a few moments, Gilbert finds Ace, approaches him, and despite everything that transpired between them, assures him that he will always have his back.
Always got your back, you know that, right?
He then has the upcoming song changed into a suitable one and proposes they should perform their usual dance numbers from the dance game they always play. After much hesitation, Ace agrees to give it a go. Gilbert and Ace perform the dance number, which goes without a hitch and ends up impressing everyone, including Summer and Chad. By the end, the effect is felt around the room as the attendees come up to Gilbert and Ace to congratulate them. Anna starts seeing Gilbert differently and decides to give him a chance. On the other hand, Ace musters up his confidence to ask the birthday girl for a dance and is ecstatic to hear her accept it. However, right before the dance, Neil's anxiety takes over Ace as he is forced to run to the portable potty and puke his guts out. Chad, who was observing the turn of events from afar, goes to the portable toilet with his friend, taunts Ace while he is still inside, and pushes the toilet onto the pool, which shocks everyone, including Summer. The furious birthday girl then throws out both Chad and Ace as the pool starts changing color to match the contents of the loo. However, before the boys make their way out, a casual alert is heard from one of the kids, who declares that the police are there. Chaos ensues as everyone tries to flee the party before the police arrive and arrest them for their underage drinking and drugs. Jimmy and Gilbert rush to the garage or steal Summer's car and flee out as the police recognize them and give chase. After leading the chase for a few minutes, Jimmy and Gilbert run out of options until Jimmy comes up with a wild idea. He drives to the local food mart, and the duo sits in the car, where Jimmy shoots both himself and Gilbert in the leg. Then, as he hears the police cars approaching, Jimmy throws the gun to the clerk, who catches it reflexively. When the police arrive, they see the clerk holding the gun and hear Jimmy's narration that the unprovoked clerk shot both of them. The police buy the story and, believing that the clerk did the previous robbery for insurance money,
Inside job.
they once again apprehend him. On the other side of town, at 11:10 p.m., Neil and Jacqueline walk to their home discussing the events of the night, and Jacqueline begs her brother to go see Summer and just straight out ask her out. After much nagging, Neil agrees and heads to Summer's house, where he finds her tidying up the mess left by the party and offers to help her. After chatting for a bit, Neil finally gives Summer her birthday present, which impresses the down-to-earth birthday girl. Then, as the conversation conversation continues, Neil is shocked when he hears Summer address him by his name and checks on his appearance, only to find that everything has gone back to the way it was, and he is now Neil. After spending a few minutes together, Neil's anxiety is nowhere to be seen as he asks Summer out for a light dinner and takes her to his father's food truck, where they continue to get to know each other. During the conversations, Neil is perplexed to hear that Summer wasn't impressed with Ace. He is also delighted to learn that Summer had planned to invite him to her birthday originally, until the day he puked on her. The duo shares their future hopes and dreams, starting with their university plans. As the night goes on, Summer asks to see Neil's comic book,
Plus, I see you drawing on your iPad all the time at school.
and is allowed after much resistance. She carefully goes through each page with admiration of the drawings, but makes fun of him for the content, which seems to concentrate all on her. On the other side of town, Gilbert and Jimmy are transported in an ambulance, inside of which they discuss their near future. Jimmy then shocks Gilbert by revealing that despite everything that happened and the scary few days ahead, this was the best birthday he's ever had. Meanwhile, Neil and Summer stay up late and continue getting to know each other. After learning about him a little, Summer tells Neil that she thinks he's cool, just the way he always dreamed she would. Neil learned the hard way that all he needed to do was just be himself and have a little confidence in what he has to offer, instead of complicating everyone's life and endangering his well-meaning best friend's future. This shows that staying true to oneself instead of succumbing to external pressure goes a long way to enrich one's life.